The Empire held its breath when the Wolf Princess greeted me with a salute, laughing. "You're back." The shuttle descended slowly through the pale clouds of the capital world, its engines humming in a steady, controlled rhythm. Below, the Imperial spire rose like a blade of light and stone, piercing the sky. It was the heart of the Galactic Empire, a place where decisions shaped the fate of thousands of worlds. Normally, arrivals here were calm, ceremonial, predictable. This arrival was none of those things. Along the vast landing platform, rows of Imperial guards stood at perfect attention. Their armor gleamed, polished until it reflected the sky itself. Behind them gathered senators, admirals, noble envoys, and observers from dozens of species. No one spoke loudly. Even breathing seemed restrained. The reason for the tension stood inside the descending shuttle. Official records said he was dead. 7 years ago, during the Border Collapse War, the human officer had vanished in deep space. His ship had been listed as destroyed. His name was quietly removed from briefings. The Empire preferred its dead to stay dead, especially those who asked too many questions and disobeyed too many orders. Yet here he was. The shuttle touched down with a soft hiss of stabilizers. The ramp did not lower immediately. Seconds passed. Every eye remained fixed on the closed hatch. Among the gathered elites stood the Wolf Princess of the Fenrir Dominion. She was tall, broad-shouldered, her silver-gray fur braided with thin metal bands marking rank and victories. Her amber eyes never left the shuttle. Unlike the others, she did not look uneasy. She looked pleased. The hatch opened. A single human stepped forward. He wore a simple dark uniform, unmarked by medals or insignia. It was clean but clearly old, the fabric faded from long use. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, yet there was nothing careless about him. His movements were efficient, controlled, the kind learned through years of command and survival. He paused at the top of the ramp, scanning the platform. Silence deepened. Some of the senators stiffened. A few admirals exchanged quick glances. Humans were rare at the capital, and this one carried a presence that made people uncomfortable. He did not look impressed. He did not look afraid. It was as if he had returned to a place he already understood. He walked down the ramp alone. Imperial protocol demanded a formal announcement, titles, lineage statements. None came. The silence stretched until it felt heavy. Then the Wolf Princess moved. Her boots struck the stone platform as she stepped forward, pushing past startled aides and guards. A ripple of shock passed through the crowd. Fenrir royalty did not approach foreign envoys without ceremony, especially not humans. She stopped a few steps from the human. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other. Then she snapped her right claw to her brow in a sharp, perfect military salute. The sound echoed. Gasps rippled across the platform. The Wolf Princess's muzzle split into a wide, open grin. A low, warm laugh escaped her chest, full of genuine emotion. "You're back," she said clearly. The human blinked once. Then slowly he returned the salute, fist to chest in the old human military way. His expression softened just slightly. "Looks like I am," he replied. The Empire collectively held its breath. No one spoke. No one moved. Every unspoken rule of hierarchy had just been broken. The Fenrir were proud warriors who bowed to no one outside their own bloodlines. A salute from their princess was not casual respect. It was acknowledgement of shared command, of equal standing earned through action. Whispers began immediately. Who was he to her? What had he done? Why had this been hidden? The Wolf Princess lowered her arm and took a step back, giving him space, but her posture remained open, respectful. She did not look at the senators or admirals. Her attention stayed on the human. Imperial master of protocol finally found his voice. "Princess, this arrival was not scheduled for." She turned her head slowly, her eyes hardened. "He is expected," she said, "by me." The official swallowed and fell silent. The human glanced around the platform, taking in the stunned faces. He spoke calmly, his voice steady but carrying easily across the space. "I'm here at the Empire's request," he said, "or at least at the request of those who remember why alliances matter." That only deepened the unease. He was escorted inside the spire soon after, though the word escorted felt wrong. The guards walked beside him, not ahead, and none attempted to restrain him. The Wolf Princess walked at his other side, ignoring every stare. As they passed through long halls of light and glass, memories stirred in the human's mind. Cold vacuum, burning hull plates, Fenris ships breaking formation under enemy fire, orders crackling through damaged comms telling him to retreat. He had not retreated. The Empire had calculated losses and decided the Fenra flank was acceptable collateral. The human task group had received the command to withdraw and preserve human assets. He remembered standing on the bridge, hands gripping the console, listening to Fenra distress calls cut off one by one. He remembered shutting off the command channel. "We're holding," he had told his crew. "All ships, we hold. 3 days without resupply. 3 days of patching hull breaches with scrap and hope." Human ships rotated into the kill zone, drawing fire so Fenra evacuation corridors could stay open. Crews slept in shifts of minutes. Medics ran out of pain suppressants and used words instead. They had held. By the time reinforcements arrived, the Fenra fleet was battered but alive. The princess herself had stood on her command deck, bloodied but unbroken, watching human ships burn rather than abandon her people. To the Fenra, that was not strategy. That was a life debt. The Empire had called it insubordination. Records were sealed, reports edited. The human ship, crippled during the final push, jumped blind into deep space. When it never returned, the Empire quietly marked him as lost. Inside the spire, the present returned. The human and the Wolf Princess entered a waiting chamber overlooking the city. Light streamed through wide windows. For a moment they were alone. She studied him openly now. "You look thinner," she said. He smiled faintly. "You look like you won the wars they told you not to fight," she laughed softly. "We survived because you stayed," he shrugged. "Anyone would have." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "No, anyone else would have followed orders." Outside the chamber, the Empire scrambled. Emergency sessions were called. Old files were accessed and resealed. Intelligence analysts argued in hushed tones. The human's return was not just unexpected, it was dangerous. He was living proof of decisions the Empire wanted forgotten. Worse, he was respected. When the formal council session finally began, the human stood alone at the center of the chamber. Representatives of countless species watched from elevated seats. The Wolf Princess sat among them, her gaze steady, her posture proud. The human did not accuse. He did not threaten. He spoke about the borders, about the quiet movements beyond mapped space, about patterns he had seen while surviving alone, moving through forgotten systems, listening to signals others ignored. "There is something coming," he said simply. "And it won't care about your politics." Some dismissed him, others listened. What none of them could deny was this: the Wolf Princess believed him, and where the wolves stood, others would follow. As the session ended, the Empire realized something too late. The human had not returned to ask for forgiveness. He had returned to warn them. And for the first time in a long while, the Empire was afraid. The council chambers were emptying, but the weight of what had just happened lingered in every corner. The human remained seated in the observation gallery, his eyes following the soft movements of the Wolf Princess as she returned to her own chambers. To anyone else, the gestures would have seemed casual, friendly even. But to those who understood military protocol, it was anything but. The princess had acknowledged him as an equal, as a comrade whose judgment could not be questioned. The Empire's records said he was dead. Yet here he was, breathing, speaking, and commanding attention. In the quiet of the gallery, the human allowed himself a brief moment to remember the events that had brought him to this point. Memories of blood, fire, and impossible survival returned with startling clarity. He had not returned to the Empire as a hero. He had returned as someone who carried the weight of years spent where no human had been expected to survive. 7 years ago, the border collapse had been a disaster of monumental proportions. Entire fleets of the Empire had been overwhelmed by a coordinated attack from the Voreth Collective, a species whose tactics were brutal and efficient. The Fenra Dominion, aligned through a fragile treaty with the Empire, had been on the front lines. Their ships, swift and heavily armed, had formed a crucial flank meant to hold back the Voreth while the Empire regrouped. But the Voreth had anticipated the Empire's movements. Traps had been laid, ambushes executed, and the Fenra fleet had been cut off in deep space. The princess herself had been on the bridge of the flagship, her silver-gray fur bristling with tension. Orders had come from Imperial Command: retreat, preserve your remaining assets, abandon the Fenra flank. The human had been attached to the mission as an advisor, officially a liaison, but unofficially the one with enough tactical knowledge to influence decisions. The orders were clear, yet he could not comply. He remembered the voice of the princess through the calm, panicked but resolute. "We cannot hold them alone. Our ships will be destroyed." His fingers had hovered over the control panel, hesitating for only a moment. Then he shut off the comm channel, cutting off the Imperial Command's voice. He had chosen to act on what he knew to be right rather than what he had been ordered to do. For 3 days, he and his small human contingent had fought alongside the Fenra. They had held corridors of space that were meant to be impossible to defend. Hulls burned, shields flickered, and air systems failed repeatedly. The human ships, fewer in number but maneuverable and relentless, had drawn fire, sacrificed crews, patched breaches with scrap and ingenuity, and covered the Fenra's escape. He remembered medics improvising with nothing but their knowledge and determination, supplies long exhausted, yet still the wounded were carried to safety. He remembered standing on the bridge of a damaged human frigate as a Voreth missile slammed into a Fenra cruiser. Flames erupted. The ship shuddered violently, sending alarms screaming across the decks. Yet the princess had not faltered. She had stayed at her console, eyes scanning the systems, issuing orders that the human and his team helped execute. She had survived because humans had refused to retreat. She had survived because he and his crew had risked everything. By the time reinforcements had arrived, the Fenra fleet was battered but intact. The princess herself had boarded the remaining human vessels to ensure the evacuation was complete. When the human ship attempted a jump to hyperspace, the engines had failed mid-leap, leaving them adrift in a sector the Empire had long considered abandoned. Communications were lost, supplies dwindled, death seemed inevitable, yet he and his crew had persevered, navigating through forgotten systems, scavenging and repairing, surviving in ways that had no place in Imperial records. They had become ghosts. Legends whispered only in hidden corners of Fenra halls. The human stood now, brushing imaginary dust from his uniform. In the council chamber, the Fenra princess had shown no sign of hesitation or doubt. She had saluted him in front of the Empire, laughing as if no one else's opinion mattered. To her, he had earned that respect. He did not take it lightly. He understood the significance. In Fenra culture, a life debt was sacred. The princess had survived because of his choices, and in return, her loyalty was bound to him in a way that no treaty or edict could break. He rose from his seat and walked toward the wide windows of the gallery, gazing down at the sprawling city below. Light reflected off the towers, gleaming like shards of crystal. The empire seemed calm, even majestic. Yet he knew the truth. It was a fragile facade. Beneath the surface, political calculations, old rivalries, and simmering fears moved like shadows. Every senator, every admiral, every noble in the chamber had registered his return differently. Some with fear, others with curiosity, many with barely disguised resentment. He had disrupted the order of things simply by surviving. He had reminded them of failures they preferred to forget, and the princess's open acknowledgment of him had magnified the effect tenfold. A soft noise behind him drew his attention. The wolf princess had entered silently, her presence as commanding as ever though her expression was calm. She stood beside him, looking out at the city, her amber eyes reflective. "The Empire does not appreciate ghosts," she said quietly, "especially those who return without permission." He allowed himself a faint smile. "I never sought permission. I only sought to survive and to ensure others could survive." She nodded, her ears twitching in subtle acknowledgement. "You have always had a mind for survival and for leadership. That is why I salute you, even here, even now." He turned to face her fully. "They may not understand why I acted as I did. They may attempt to rewrite the past, but the truth is evident to those who were there, to those who survived, and to those who understand loyalty." The princess studied him, her gaze unwavering. "Then they will learn it again. They will have to." Across the capital, the empire stirred in response to his return. Private councils convened in hidden chambers. Analysts pored over old mission logs and classified reports. Whispers of rebellion, disobedience, and truth spread quietly among select circles. The human's presence was not merely symbolic, it was disruptive. It challenged decades of carefully constructed narratives and demanded recognition of actions that had been erased from official memory. Outside, the city continued its rhythms as if oblivious, citizens unaware of the political tremors set in motion by a single human's return. And yet, those who truly understood knew the implications. A life once considered lost had returned with knowledge, experience, and authority that could alter the balance of power within the empire. In a private chamber, the princess and the human reviewed maps of the sector where the border collapse had occurred. Hyperspace lanes, supply routes, and patrol zones were all marked in intricate detail. He traced paths with his fingers, explaining maneuvers executed during the past war, the obstacles faced, and the calculations made under extreme pressure. Her notes reflected precision and admiration, not just for his tactical skill, but for the courage displayed by human crews who had acted against impossible odds. "Few would risk everything for another species," he said, his voice steady but low. "Most would retreat at the first sign of danger. Most would obey orders and leave their allies behind." She did not respond immediately, simply watching him. After a moment she spoke. "That is why I salute you, because you chose otherwise. You chose life, loyalty, and honor over safety. That choice changed the fate of my people." The human absorbed the words silently. He had never sought recognition, never sought reward, yet acknowledgement from the wolf princess meant more than any medal or title. It carried the weight of a bond forged in fire, tested through suffering, and proven through survival. Meanwhile, the empire could not ignore the potential consequences. High councils debated quietly over what action to take. Some saw him as a threat to established authority, a reminder of inconvenient truths. Others saw opportunity. His knowledge, his leadership, and the loyalty of those who had survived because of him could be invaluable. No consensus emerged, only careful calculation and cautious observation. The human, unaware of every whisper and every hidden counsel, focused on the practical. He was here to ensure the Empire, the Fenra, and every allied species were prepared for what might come next. His experiences had taught him that survival depended not on fear, not on strict hierarchy, but on trust, coordination, and the willingness to act decisively when needed. He knew the Empire would have to learn this lesson quickly, whether they wanted to or not. As the day turned to evening, light fading across the spire, the human and the wolf princess stepped onto a balcony overlooking the city. The wind moved through the princess's fur and the human's hair, carrying the scent of distant oceans and forests from worlds far beyond the capital. For a moment, the weight of politics, war, and survival felt distant. Yet beneath that calm, both understood the truth. The past had returned with them, and the Empire would have to reckon with it. The Wolf Princess broke the silence. They do not know what you have done, and most will never understand. He looked at her, eyes reflecting the fading light. Understanding is not necessary for action. They will act according to the truth when the time comes. They will remember. She gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of shared understanding. And we will be ready. The human allowed himself a final glance at the horizon. Memories of burned hulls, exhausted crews, and the faces of those who had survived flashed through his mind. He had returned not to claim glory but to prepare, to guide, and to ensure that loyalty and courage, no matter the species, would never again be overlooked. The city beneath them gleamed, unaware of the storm of change that had quietly arrived. And high above, in the chambers of the Empire, the return of a single human and the salute of a wolf princess would ripple outward, altering destinies and reshaping alliances. The Empire had held its breath. Now it had to wake. If you want, I can continue with part 3 in the same style, keeping it action-driven, politically tense, and fully engaging for 1,800 words. Do you want me to do that next? The council chamber had emptied, but the tension remained thick in the air, heavy as the polished stone beneath the human's boots. Outside, the city hummed with life, unaware that its fate, and the fate of countless worlds, was quietly being reshaped. The human walked alongside the wolf princess, her presence a steady reassurance. Every step he took drew attention, though few dared meet his eyes directly. He moved with the calm authority of someone who had survived where others would have fallen, someone whose experience demanded recognition, whether the Empire wanted to grant it or not. Imperial administrators were already whispering behind closed doors, debating how to handle his unexpected return. His presence reminded them of inconvenient truths they had worked to suppress, disobedience that had saved lives, alliances forged through trust rather than political convenience, and an audacity that challenged the Empire's rigid hierarchy. For the first time, whispers of fear and admiration mingled. Humans, once considered unpredictable and unreliable, were suddenly seen in a new light, and the Wolf Princess's salute, simple yet profound, had amplified that shift. "Do they always plan so cautiously?" he asked quietly, gesturing toward a nearby assembly of Imperial advisors, their faces tense as they pored over data and strategy reports. The Wolf Princess shook her head, amber eyes reflecting a mix of amusement and exasperation. The Empire fears ghosts more than enemies. They fear what they cannot control, what cannot be dictated by law or command. That is why your return unsettles them so deeply. He nodded, understanding fully. Fear was a tool, but also a weakness. The Empire had wielded it for centuries to maintain control. Yet, in this moment, fear had become their vulnerability. It whispered of past mistakes and unfulfilled debts, reminding every species present that survival often depended on choices, courage, and loyalty, rather than rank or law. They entered a strategic command chamber, a vast space lined with holographic maps, illuminated screens, and models of fleets and planetary systems. The room smelled faintly of ozone and machinery, the air circulating quietly as if in anticipation. Advisors and officers from multiple species had been summoned, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and caution. None questioned his presence openly, though eyes flicked to him repeatedly, measuring, calculating. The human moved to the central console, spreading his hands over the projected star maps. He traced paths of past campaigns, routes taken during the border collapse, and sectors that had been abandoned or ignored. His knowledge of the space beyond mapped lanes was precise. Every line represented weeks of survival, every coordinate a memory of danger narrowly evaded. "This is where the Vorath hit," he said, pointing to a sector marked with jagged red streaks. "And this corridor," he continued, tracing a faint trail through what the Empire considered empty systems, "was how we survived. No sensors, no patrols, no recorded jumps. Just careful planning and willingness to act where others would hesitate." His voice was calm, factual, yet carried the weight of experience. The Wolf Princess leaned in, nodding. "You calculated risk differently than the Empire would. You valued life over orders, yet still maintained control over the chaos. That is why we survived." He allowed himself a faint smile, not of pride but of acknowledgement. "Orders are only words. Action is the measure of truth. The Empire may record events, but only survival confirms them." Across the chamber, the assembled advisors whispered among themselves. Some noted the tactical brilliance, others the courage and audacity. Few could deny the impact of his actions. The human had not returned seeking recognition. Yet every calculation, every memory he recounted, reminded them that humans, when they acted as humans were capable of, could alter outcomes that the Empire considered predetermined. A senior admiral finally spoke, his voice cautious but deliberate. "If your calculations are correct and your experience reflects reality, then the Empire has misjudged the frontier for years. Human operations were more effective than recorded. And the Fenra credit you with saving lives at a time when Imperial command had abandoned them." The human did not respond immediately. He preferred measured words, the kind that carried clarity rather than provoked debate. "Effectiveness is meaningless without trust. Without loyalty between those who act, the strategy fails. The Fenra knew we would not abandon them. That trust saved them, not orders, not imperial design." The Wolf Princess stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. "He saved lives because he chose to act, because he chose to stand where others would not, and because he honored the bond between species, a bond the Empire has long ignored." Murmurs swept through the chamber. Some species representatives leaned forward, curiosity replacing caution. Humans were rare, but stories of their determination and ingenuity were whispered in far corners of the galaxy. Now, seeing one return, respected openly by a prominent Fenra leader, shifted perception. This human was not merely a survivor. He was a symbol of what humanity could achieve when operating beyond the Empire's rigid rules. The human's eyes scanned the chamber, resting briefly on representatives who had doubted his value in the past. "The Empire relies on compliance and protocol," he said quietly. "Those are tools, but they are not substitutes for action. When the frontier fell, compliance failed. Only action saved lives. Only understanding allies saved lives." The Wolf Princess's ears twitched, signaling approval. "He speaks not as a commander, but as one who lived every decision and every consequence. That is why the Fenra respect him." She paused, letting the words sink in. "And that respect will guide my people in the times ahead." A young senator, humanoid but with pale violet skin and delicate features, leaned forward, skepticism clear in her voice. "And yet disobedience, your actions, your defiance of imperial orders, cannot be overlooked. You acted against the Empire." The human looked at her steadily, calm but unwavering. "I acted to preserve life. That is not defiance. That is responsibility. Orders are meaningless if they destroy those who depend on us." His words carried a weight that silenced the room. Few had ever spoken so plainly about duty without invoking loyalty to rank or office. He did not seek to lecture, yet the truth was undeniable. The Wolf Princess added softly, "And that is why we are here today. Not for blame, not for punishment, but for preparation. The Empire will face challenges it does not yet understand. Survival will depend on action, judgment, and trust, and he has proven he can lead when others fail." As discussion continued, A technician approached the console, projecting intelligence data from the frontier sectors. Sensor anomalies, uncharted movements, and faint signals beyond Imperial scans flickered across the display. The human's eyes narrowed. His memory of past campaigns, of navigation through uncharted corridors, allowed him to recognize patterns the Empire had dismissed as random. He pointed to one cluster of signals. "These are not natural," he said. "These systems are being moved, shifted, manipulated. Something is probing the frontier, something that will not announce itself until it is ready." Gasps and quiet murmurs swept through the room. The intelligence data was technical, but his interpretation was unsettling. The Empire prided itself on control, on knowing what lurked beyond the borders. Yet here was proof that their assumptions were incomplete, their sensors limited, and their strategies potentially obsolete. The Wolf Princess's eyes met his, amber and sharp. "You see what they cannot," she said. "That is why your return matters, not to take command, but to guide, to prepare, to unite those who will need leadership when the Empire cannot provide it." He considered her words carefully. He had no desire for personal power. Recognition had never been his goal. Survival, preparation, and the bond with those who depended on him were what mattered. "Then we must act," he said. "We must ensure that every species, every fleet, every ally is prepared. Coordination and trust will be the difference between survival and catastrophe." Plans were drawn, not just for defense, but for communication, supply lines, and joint operations. The human coordinated with Fenra officers, Imperial advisors, and representatives from other species. His suggestions were not theoretical. They were drawn from experience, from the brutal lessons learned during the border collapse. Every measure, every contingency, reflected the reality of action under pressure. Some questioned his methods, fearing they challenged traditional protocol. Others recognized their value immediately. Slowly, a consensus formed, not through coercion, but through understanding. Humans, when trusted, could think beyond established constraints. They could act decisively and adaptively, qualities the Empire had long undervalued. The Wolf Princess remained by his side throughout, her presence a visible symbol of loyalty and shared purpose. To the other species, it was proof that humans could command respect, not through fear or bureaucracy, but through action, courage, and integrity. The room, once cautious and tense, now buzzed with a mix of apprehension and hope. It was clear that the human's return was more than personal. It was a shift in perception, an awakening. As the hours passed, the human and the Wolf Princess moved from strategy session to strategy session, coordinating movements, reviewing intelligence, and ensuring that every decision accounted for unknown variables. Imperial officers took careful notes, realizing that these strategies reflected not only tactical brilliance but practical survival instincts honed under extreme conditions. Fenra leaders whispered among themselves, admiring the precision and foresight. Representatives from other species began to recognize that the human's presence offered something rare, unity through trust rather than fear. Even as night fell over the capital, the discussions continued. Holographic maps glowed softly in the dimmed light, displaying fleets in motion, trade routes, and sectors under surveillance. The human traced paths, adjusted positions, and marked contingencies with calm, deliberate motions. Every calculation reflected both strategy and lived experience. Every decision accounted for allies, not just assets, and every gesture reminded those present that leadership was measured not by rank or title, but by action and loyalty. By the time the session concluded, exhaustion weighed on all present. Yet there was a quiet satisfaction, a recognition that progress had been made. The human had not merely returned to the Empire. He had reminded it of its own limitations, forced it to confront uncomfortable truths, and inspired confidence in those who had doubted the power of humanity. The Wolf Princess, standing at his side, offered no applause, no overt celebration, but her steady gaze and unwavering presence were acknowledgment enough. As they stepped out into the cool night air, overlooking the city lights, the human allowed himself a moment to reflect. 7 years had passed since he had vanished. 7 years of survival, adaptation, and perseverance. And now, finally, his return was no longer just personal. It was a catalyst. The Empire, the Fenra, and every allied species would have to recognize the value of action over orders, trust over fear, and courage over protocol. The frontier, once a place of death and abandonment, could now be a place of preparation, of unity, of hope. And he, a single human among many, had become the thread that bound it all together. The calm of the capital world was shattered before dawn. A warning signal pulsed across the Empire's communications network, red and urgent, carrying a message that no one wanted to hear. Fleets along the outer sectors had detected an ancient machine fleet emerging from dark space. These were constructs long thought to be myths, relics of a time before even the oldest species in the Empire had recorded history. Their ships moved with precision and coordination that surpassed the Empire's most advanced warcraft. Sensors could detect no signs of life, yet every probe and every drone indicated a methodical intelligence. The threat was immediate, systematic, and merciless. The human was already in the command chamber when the alerts began. He did not flinch, though his eyes sharpened, scanning the holographic projections that sprang to life across the room. The Vorath, pirates, and other known enemies could be countered with conventional tactics. This was different. These machines operated on logic, efficiency, and adaptability beyond any living adversary. Traditional strategies would fail. He knew that instinctively. The Wolf Princess stood beside him, her expression unreadable but alert. "They are larger than we feared," she said quietly. "We underestimated them before." He nodded. "We did, and that mistake cannot be repeated. The Empire's fleets are scattered. The border patrols are insufficient. Alone, we would fall." The council was convened again immediately, with representatives from multiple species gathering as quickly as possible. Senators murmured in fear, admirals debated tactics, and analysts frantically tried to understand the nature of the machine fleet. Many proposed retreat. Some suggested surrender. Few dared to suggest coordinated engagement. The human spoke last, his voice calm but carrying authority. "Retreat is not survival. Surrender is not preparation. The Empire can be preserved, but only if we act decisively and together. Humans, Fenra, and all allied species must unite under a single strategy. If we operate separately, we will be defeated." Silence followed. His words were not a command, they were a statement of fact. The Wolf Princess stepped forward, supporting him without hesitation. "He saved my fleet once when the Empire abandoned us. I trust his judgment. My people will follow." Other species hesitated at first. Fenra loyalty was known, but the Empire's allies were fragmented and wary. Yet the human's reputation, combined with the princess's visible support, began to shift attitudes. Slowly, representatives agreed to temporary joint command, setting aside personal pride for survival. Orders were given to mobilize fleets. Human, Fenra, and allied ships prepared to rendezvous at strategic points along the border sectors. The human coordinated with officers from each species, explaining maneuvers that leveraged the strengths of each fleet while compensating for weaknesses. Unlike conventional imperial command, his strategy accounted for trust and cooperation as much as firepower. He instructed crews to rely on each other, to share intelligence freely, and to trust in actions rather than orders alone. When the fleets reached the first engagement zone, the machine ships were already waiting. They moved in formations that seemed impossible, surrounding targets before fleets could respond. Energy beams cut through space with precision, disabling shields and hulls alike. Sensors indicated that conventional countermeasures were largely ineffective. Yet the human did not panic. He had seen similar situations in forgotten sectors, where ingenuity and adaptation were the only paths to survival. He directed small human squadrons to act as decoys, drawing fire while Fenra cruisers struck at weak points in the enemy formation. Allied species ships coordinated to flank the machines, while repair crews patched damage as quickly as it appeared. The human moved from console to console, advising on positioning, timing, and energy allocation, his experience turning panic into calculated action. The battle raged for hours. Explosions lit the dark void, debris scattered across the stars like deadly confetti. Machine constructs adapted with frightening speed, closing gaps in the formation and targeting vulnerable ships. Yet the human strategy held. By anticipating patterns, predicting maneuvers, and relying on the trust and skill of Allied crews, he prevented the fleet from being encircled and annihilated. At one critical moment, a Fenra dreadnought became trapped by a machine swarm. The human ordered a small human strike group to intercept, even though the maneuver placed them directly in the line of fire. Human pilots, trained in improvisation and quick decision-making, executed the order flawlessly, creating a corridor for the Fenra ship to escape. The princess watched from her bridge, amber eyes wide with both fear and admiration. Every risk was calculated, every action precise, yet it required faith in the human's judgment. As the first wave of attacks subsided, fleets regrouped in orbit around a strategic planet. Damage reports indicated that losses had been significant but manageable. Morale, surprisingly, remained high. Crews had seen that coordination worked. Trust mattered more than orders, and the human, whose return had been shocking to the Empire, had become a symbol of hope. During a brief respite, the human convened a council of fleet commanders. His approach was simple but revolutionary for many. Communication lines remained open, every decision was discussed quickly, and loyalty was prioritized over hierarchy. "If we act in isolation," he explained, "we die. If we act in trust, we survive. Trust will determine the outcome." The Wolf Princess added her voice firm and unwavering. "We Fenra will follow his guidance. Others must decide, but the choice is clear. Unity is survival." Some hesitated, still clinging to tradition. The human did not chastise them. Instead, he used data, historical examples, and lessons from the border collapse to illustrate why the old methods were insufficient. Slowly, commanders began to adapt, not out of fear, but because action spoke louder than orders. A second engagement began as the machine fleet regrouped. This time, the humans' tactics were anticipatory rather than reactive. Feints, diversions, and multi-species coordination disrupted the enemy's patterns. Shielded human frigates drew concentrated fire while Fenra and allied ships struck from unexpected vectors. Even small, seemingly insignificant maneuvers had outsized effects, exploiting the machine's predictability. The battle lasted for days. Star systems became fields of debris, but the humans' coalition held firm. Each success reinforced trust. Human crews, Fenra warriors, and allied species learned to rely on one another, to act without waiting for permission, and to value life and judgment over protocol. The human moved constantly among consoles, issuing orders, adjusting strategy, and anticipating enemy movements. His calm under pressure inspired confidence. His experience turned fear into precision. In the midst of combat, the human noticed a critical vulnerability. The machine fleet relied on a central command hub to coordinate attacks. Destroy it, and the swarm would falter. Yet the hub was heavily defended, almost inaccessible. He formulated a plan, one that required every species to contribute in perfect coordination. Human squadrons would create diversionary attacks, Fenra cruisers would target defensive satellites, and Allied ships would form a protective shield around the strike team assigned to reach the hub. Execution required absolute trust. Communications had to remain open, decisions had to be made instantly, and each crew had to act on instinct as well as instruction. There was no margin for error. As the plan unfolded, the human moved calmly between stations, his presence a stabilizing force. The Wolf Princess coordinated her fleet with precision, her loyalty evident in every command she gave. The strike succeeded. The hub was destroyed and the machine fleet faltered, their coordination disrupted. Individual constructs continued to fight, but without centralized control, their movements became predictable. Fleets that had once been on the defensive seized the initiative, driving the machines back through careful, calculated attacks. By the time reinforcements arrived from distant sectors, the immediate threat had been neutralized. The cost had been high. Several ships were lost, crews injured and sectors devastated. Yet the Empire, the Fenra, and allied species had survived. More importantly, they had survived as a unified force, guided not by fear, not by orders, but by action, trust, and courage. The human, whose return had initially caused tension and unease, had become the linchpin of this unity. In the aftermath, fleets regrouped and repairs began. Crews worked tirelessly, motivated not by duty alone, but by the understanding that their survival had depended on cooperation and trust. Across sectors, reports circulated of small acts of bravery and quick thinking that turned potential disaster into victory. Humans had been central to these acts, but so had Fenra and other allied species, proving that unity was greater than individual strength. In a private chamber overlooking the fleet, the Wolf Princess turned to the human. "You have changed the way the Empire sees us all," she said softly. "Not just humans, not just Fenra. Every species that relied on action over orders has been given a new voice." He nodded, exhaustion tugging at him, but his resolve remained steady. "We did what had to be done. That is all that matters. The Empire now sees that survival requires trust, coordination, and courage, not obedience alone." She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch both acknowledgement and reassurance. "And when the next threat comes, they will remember this. They will know who to trust and what it means to act." The human looked out at the stars, remembering every decision, every life saved, and every sacrifice made. The frontier had tested them, and they had survived. But the lesson was clear. The Empire would face threats far greater than the Vorath or pirates. Only by embracing trust, adaptability, and courage could they endure. And the bond between humans and Fenra, forged in fire and battle, would stand as proof that even the greatest machine could not defeat determination united by loyalty. As night settled across the capital world, the human and the Wolf Princess watched fleets reorganize, ships repaired, and crews preparing for whatever came next. The battle had been won, but the war for understanding, for trust, and for the future of the Empire had only just begun. Their victory was more than strategic, it was symbolic. The Empire had learned, at last, that humans were not just unpredictable. They were anchors, leaders, and partners in survival. And the Wolf Princess's salute, once a singular gesture of respect, had grown into a declaration of unity that could not be ignored. The fleets were quiet now, the vast expanse of space filled with the remnants of battle. Smoke and debris drifted slowly between stars, carrying with them the cost of survival and the evidence of courage. The human stood on the observation deck of the flagship, his hands resting lightly on the railing, eyes scanning the damaged but intact vessels. He did not speak, did not celebrate. Victory had been earned, yes, but it had come at a price, and he understood that survival was not a moment. It was a continuous effort, a commitment to vigilance and preparation. The Wolf Princess approached, her movements silent yet commanding. Her amber eyes reflected the faint glow of distant star systems, and her presence was a reminder that some bonds could not be measured by rank or title. "You look tired," she said, her voice soft, carrying no reproach, only acknowledgement. He allowed himself a small smile. "It is not fatigue," he replied. "It is the knowledge that the work is not finished. Survival is never complete. There will always be threats. The challenge is to meet them prepared." She studied him for a long moment. "Few understand that, fewer act on it." Her gaze softened. "And yet here you are. You acted when others hesitated. You led when others faltered." He shook his head gently. "I did what had to be done. That is all any of us can do. Orders are empty words if they are not supported by action. Trust is the measure of survival. That is the lesson." Down below, repair crews and fleet engineers moved with urgency. Ships were being patched, shields recalibrated, and weapons systems restored. The battle had tested the limits of every species involved, but it had also forged an understanding that would last far beyond the immediate crisis. Humans, Fenra, and other allies had learned the value of coordination, of loyalty, of acting decisively when survival depended on it. In the council chamber, the Empire's highest leaders gathered once more. Reports of the battle were presented, data and analytics displayed in holographic projections. Every detail confirmed what the human had predicted. Unity and trust had been the deciding factors. Individual skill alone could not have saved the Empire from the ancient machine fleet. Only combined efforts, guided by judgment and cooperation, had ensured survival. The Emperor himself, a figure who rarely displayed emotion, remained silent as he reviewed the records. Advisors whispered behind closed doors, noting that the human strategies had outperformed centuries of imperial doctrine. Some feared him. Some admired him. Few could deny the truth. The human had changed the way the Empire understood strength, leadership, and survival. The Wolf Princess addressed the assembly, her voice clear and firm. "We Fenra owe a life debt that cannot be measured in words alone. He honored that debt. He honored my people. And through his actions, he has demonstrated the power of loyalty, courage, and decisive action." She gestured toward the human, standing modestly to the side. "Let this be a lesson for all. Strength is not defined by titles, by orders, or by fear. Strength is defined by the courage to act, the wisdom to trust, and the willingness to stand when others would fall." The assembly fell silent. Even those who had doubted humans, who had feared their unpredictability, felt the weight of her words. It was more than a tribute. It was an acknowledgement that humanity had a role the Empire could not ignore. In private, the human and the Wolf Princess discussed the future. He laid out strategies for monitoring the frontier, coordinating fleets, and ensuring that no species would face such a threat alone again. His plans were precise, but not rigid. They allowed for flexibility, improvisation, and trust, the qualities that had proven essential during the battle. "The Empire must learn to rely on more than orders and protocol," he said. "They must recognize that leadership is measured by action, not rank. That trust can save what rules cannot." She nodded, her ears twitching slightly in agreement. "And they will. They cannot ignore the proof before them. Humanity has shown what it can do, and I will ensure my people remember." Over the following weeks, the Empire officially recognized the events of the border collapse and the recent defense against the machine fleet. Records were amended, and reports that had once erased the humans' actions were corrected. Fenra leaders, inspired by their princess's acknowledgement, advocated for continued cooperation and joint command structures. Allied species, once hesitant, began to adopt similar practices, learning to trust each other's decisions and capabilities. The human did not seek praise, medals, or titles. His focus remained on preparation, understanding, and the coordination necessary to face threats beyond imagination. Yet the recognition he received was unprecedented. For the first time, the Empire formally acknowledged a human not merely as a participant, but as a leader, a strategist, and a savior. One morning, standing on the observation deck with the Wolf Princess, he watched fleets move in formation across the starlit void. Ships of every size and design operated seamlessly, crews communicating, adjusting, and supporting one another. It was a sight that would have seemed impossible before his return, a demonstration of unity forged in crisis. The princess turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you realize what you have done, not just in battle but in changing how the Empire perceives humans?" He looked out at the fleets, the quiet hum of engines and shields filling the void. "I only acted when necessary. Recognition is not the goal. Survival is, trust is. And now the Empire knows what we can achieve when we work together." She smiled faintly. "They will remember, and they will follow. Your presence here has proven that humanity is not merely a part of the Empire. Humanity is an anchor, a guide, a force that others can rely on when all else fails." As the weeks passed, the human continued to coordinate fleet movements, training exercises, and intelligence gathering. He worked closely with the Wolf Princess, refining strategies and ensuring that alliances remained strong. The bond between humans and Fenra deepened, based on mutual respect and shared experience rather than treaties alone. News of his return spread across imperial sectors. Young officers and cadets studied his actions, learning from his approach to leadership and coordination. Veterans shared stories of his courage and decisiveness. Humans, once considered unreliable, became symbols of resilience and ingenuity. Fenra warriors carried his example into training and combat preparation. Allied species, inspired by the demonstrated success of trust and cooperation, adopted similar practices. The empire itself began to change subtly. Councils incorporated joint decision-making structures. Fleets practiced coordinated maneuvers that reflected the human's philosophy. Trust and loyalty gained new value, complementing protocol and hierarchy rather than being overshadowed by them. For the first time, leadership was measured not solely by command, but by ability to inspire, act decisively, and maintain cohesion under pressure. One evening, as the human and the Wolf Princess watched the sun rise over the spire, casting long reflections across the city, she spoke softly. "Do you ever regret returning?" He shook his head slowly. "No, survival requires action. I acted when necessary. The Empire, the Fenra, are allies. They have learned because of it. That is enough." She smiled, a rare, genuine expression. "And the salute," he glanced at her, recalling the first moment she had acknowledged him publicly. "It is more than a gesture. It is a promise. A recognition of trust, of loyalty, of life shared in peril. It has grown beyond a simple act. It now represents unity." The princess nodded. "Then let it stand. Let it be remembered. Let it guide the empire when fear and politics would otherwise blind them." Months later, in a grand assembly that included representatives from every corner of the empire, the human was formally acknowledged for his actions. Speeches praised his courage, his leadership, and the inspiration he had provided. The Wolf Princess saluted him publicly once more, joined by admirals, generals, and allied delegates. The salute, simple and profound, carried a weight that no words could fully express. It was a symbol of respect, recognition, and the enduring power of action over protocol. As the assembly concluded, the human stood quietly, the applause and cheers filling the chamber. He did not bow. He did not raise his hand. Instead, he allowed the moment to pass, understanding that the true value lay not in recognition, but in the continued preparation, unity, and trust that would shape the empire's future. The Wolf Princess approached him once more, her voice low but full of warmth. "You're back," she said, echoing the words she had spoken when he first returned. "And now the empire stands with you." He met her gaze, eyes calm, steady, and resolute. "Then we are ready," he said simply. Outside, fleets moved in perfect harmony, alliances strengthened, and the Empire prepared for whatever challenges lay beyond the horizon. Humans were no longer unpredictable outsiders. They had become anchors, leaders, and symbols of resilience. Their actions had reminded every species that courage, trust, and decisive action were greater than fear, greater than orders, and greater than titles. The human looked once more at the stars, the endless possibilities of space stretching before him. Every decision, every sacrifice, every act of loyalty had led to this moment. The Empire had survived not because it commanded, but because it had learned to trust. And humanity, steadfast and unwavering, had reminded the galaxy what it meant to stand, to fight, and to endure. The Wolf Princess saluted him again, a gesture now steeped in history, honor, and shared experience. And as the human returned the salute, the Empire held its breath one final time, not in fear, but in acknowledgement of the bond forged through trials, courage, and unyielding trust. The frontier was no longer a place of uncertainty. It was a place of preparation, unity, and strength. And at the heart of that unity stood a single human, steadfast, courageous, and ever vigilant, proving that the galaxy could rely not just on orders or laws, but on the enduring power of humanity. The Empire had learned, the galaxy had witnessed, and the human had returned, not merely to survive but to change history forever.